It is official. Sean Diddy Combs has been sentenced in his federal criminal case. We're going to discuss everything that happened inside that courtroom, including the bombshell decision by the judge.
The air inside the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. You could feel the tension vibrating through every corner, through every quiet breath, through every set of eyes locked on one man, Sean Diddy Combs. The once untouchable titan of hip-hop stood there in a crisp suit that couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into his face.
Today was the day. After 2 years from when Cassie Ventura Fine filed her lawsuit against Sean Combs, after an investigation, after a raid, after the Cassie tape was published by CNN, after an apology video, after an arrest, after multiple indictments, superseding indictments, after an 8-week trial over the summer, where Sean Diddy Combs was acquitted of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, but convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, namely transporting people across state and international lines for sex work, he was sentenced for his crimes today. Judge Arun Subramanian in federal court in downtown Lower Manhattan sentenced the rap mogul. Just handed down the sentence a few minutes ago at the time of this recording. Now, to be clear, why this is such a big deal, other than the fact that Sean Combs has been sentenced for federal sex crimes, we had no idea what the actual sentence will be. There is no pro forma mandatory sentence here, like a life in prison. It's just a standard. We know what's going to happen. No, there was a range for this judge. The defense was asking for no more than 14 months in prison. And since Sean Combs had already served about 13 months in the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, he essentially would be out in no time if that was the case. The prosecution was asking for 11 years. The probation department that did its own analysis recommended 7 years and 3 months. There was a range. We did not know what the sentence would be. We are going to get into everything that happened today, including what it was like in that courtroom when the sentence was handed down. And to do that, I want to bring back on Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth Milner, Law and Crime Zone. She was inside that courtroom not only for today, for every day of this trial. This is the conclusion of quite a saga. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. First, I want to start off, how did Sean Combs look? Okay, that was a big question. I know we have courtroom sketches that came out. How did he look? How did he appear? What was his demeanor? We'll talk about the statement he made in court, but just how did he look?
Yeah, well, Jesse, you can imagine how big of today actually was for Sean Combs. I mean, he was going to be learning his fate. And to your point in your intro earlier, we didn't know where that range would really lie. Could it be on the tail end of that being time served and he could possibly leave walking out of the doors? We didn't know if that was going to happen. We didn't know if he was possibly going to get double-digit sentence. So I think the weight of the world you could kind of feel when he walked inside the courtroom today. He was wearing casual clothes, civilian clothes, so he wasn't in his MDC tan jumpsuit or anything like that, like he was at the last hearing that happened just last week. But today he appeared in a tan sweater, white undershirt, dark pants, similar to the looks that he was appearing in during trial. And then when he walked inside the courtroom today, Jesse, he waved at his family. He did kind of like a little prayer hand, but he did seem a little bit nervous. And I think it's possibly because they just didn't know where the sentencing would go. And so he sat at the defense table with his glasses, and then the proceedings began. But you can only imagine what was really going on in his mind as soon as he walked in, saw his family, saw the amount of people inside that courtroom, because Jesse, it was a packed house today, body to body, person to person. There was no seat left unseated today inside that courtroom.
Real quick, talk to me about that. I heard there was 30 people in the front rows that were friends and family of Sean Combs. Anybody notable?
So Jesse, today inside the courtroom, it really was a kind of a little bit of a who's who was in there. I mean, everyone from Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, Keisha Combs, Diddy's sister, Dallas Austin, who was a music producer. He was inside that courtroom today. Sean Combs' children, that being Jesse and Delilah Combs, the twins. It was Quincy Brown who was there. Justin Combs was there. Christian Combs was there. But I think what was interesting, Jesse, and a notable guest, at least to me, was alleged victim number 3, and that being Gina Hun. She came inside the courtroom a little bit.
His hands fidgeted on the table, the same hands that once signed million-dollar deals, that once held champagne flutes at rooftop parties above the city skyline. Now, those same hands trembled as he waited to hear his fate. This wasn't just another celebrity case. This was the final reckoning for one of the most powerful men in music. The judge sat poised, unmoved by the spectacle, the cameras, the whispers that filled the room. She didn't look at him like a star, or a businessman, or a legend. She looked at him like a man who had run out of chances. When she began to speak, her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that makes your blood run cold because you can tell it's carrying a sentence that will change everything. Diddy's eyes darted between his lawyers, his lips parting slightly as if trying to catch his breath. The courtroom fell silent. The sound of paper shifting in the judge's hands was louder than a thunderclap. Then, it happened. The words dropped like a bomb, the number of years, the harshness, the finality. The moment those words left the judge's mouth, Diddy froze. His face went blank for a split second, like his mind couldn't register what he'd just heard. Then the shock cracked, and the weight of it all came crashing down. His eyes went wide, his jaw clenched, and before anyone could react,
Yeah, she wasn't there at all. And it was kind of a big shocker to your point, Jesse, that she wasn't there because we thought that she would be inside the courtroom. And we were kind of curious who the government witnesses who would be there to give their final victim impact statements ahead of the judge giving down Sean Combs' sentencing. But today, right off the bat, Christy Slavic, who is a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, she said Mia no longer wishes to give an impact statement. She had submitted that written statement and that the tone of the defense letter, I think, was what really kind of changed her mind as to coming into the courtroom today. And I can only imagine probably how Mia feels specifically. She's using a pseudonym even to testify, even as she's writing letters to the court because of just the fear that she has been getting in terms of what she believed to be backlash, either from Sean Combs or his fans, or even just the attention that it's that the case has brought against her too. And so I was very surprised that she didn't attend court in person today, but I can understand why, because even the judge said to Mark Agnifilo today that the tone of the defense's letter in response to Mia giving a victim impact statement was just completely inappropriate. And it was a pretty harsh letter, Jesse. I'm sure that you've already read it, but it was kind of a very harsh tone, and it was kind of similar a little bit to her cross-examination too.
Now let's talk about the prosecution. So prosecutors today, they outlined their argument in court. It echoed a lot of what their filings were in anticipation of this sentencing. What were some of the key arguments, the themes that stood out today about why they say it was justified for Sean Combs to have a lengthy sentence? Remember, they were asking for 11 years. How did they justify it today? What were the arguments they made in court?
Yeah, well, today, Christy Slavic, making the arguments on behalf of the government, she said that today is about accountability and justice. And she was talking specifically about accountability, Jesse. She was talking about the conduct that was lasting for a 15-year period. I mean, even if you go back to the superseding indictments where it says this conduct went on from 2009 all the way to 2024, that's a long period of time. And so from the government's perspective, they really just wanted accountability from the defendant, that being Sean Combs. And then they also wanted justice, particularly for the victims. I know when we often talk about the Sean Combs case, the Diddy case, the P. Diddy case, he is the focus of this. But I think a lot of people have to remember that there were victims in this case, that being Cassie Ventura, that being Jane, that also kind of also applying to some of the charges that he was acquitted for too, where you can also bring in like Mia and Capricorn Clark and Deontay Nash. And so I think the government from their perspective was really trying to speak on behalf of all of those people. And so today, Christy Slavic, again, she was saying that the law requires the court to know all about the defendant and the defendant's conduct. This isn't just a case about freak-offs and hotel nights. It's about a man who did horrible things to people. He weaponized currency against victims. They were talking about that even though he was convicted just on the Mann Act charges, that it's also kind of in relation to the violence, and that the defendant didn't understand or doesn't understand how harsh his conduct was, and that his respect for the law was just something as simple as lip service. And so, yes, the government was asking for a far steeper penalty and punishment when it came to Sean Combs' sentencing. They were hoping for those double digits, and I think they were kind of opposed to the whole split the baby method, as Christy Slavic said today in court. And so they did want a harsher end of the sentencing today. And I think as far as the judge is concerned and what his ultimate sentence would be, it kind of ended up being a kind of happy medium a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And the defense, number of defense attorneys.
He let out a low, broken sound, something between disbelief and pain. The courtroom gasped. His lawyers tried to steady him, but he pushed their hands away. This wasn't just a sentence. This was a public execution of his pride, his image, his legacy. He started shaking his head, his voice breaking through the silence. "No, this can't be right," he muttered. "This isn't justice." But the judge didn't flinch. She didn't respond. The sentence had been spoken, it was final. The guards moved closer as Diddy began pacing, his every movement frantic, desperate. The cameras clicked, recording every second of his unraveling. For years, this man had stood above everyone, confident, cocky, untouchable. But now, in that courtroom, stripped of his entourage, his wealth, his control, he was just another man facing the consequences of his actions. The public had been waiting for this day. Weeks of trial coverage, testimonies, evidence, and speculation had built to this moment.
Spoke, I think almost all of them. You had Xavier Donaldson, you had Brian Steele. What were some of the themes they were focusing on in terms of why Sean Combs deserves a lenient sentence, why 14 months would be appropriate?
Yeah, so right off the bat, Jason Driscoll making the arguments on behalf of the defense, because Jesse, yes, it was Jason Driscoll who spoke. It was Nicole Westmoreland who spoke, Xavier Donaldson who spoke, Mark Agnifilo and Brian Steele. That's 5 of his, 9 defense attorneys who all spoke in court today. So as far as Jason Driscoll is concerned, he was saying that the defense says that Combs didn't make money off of the Mann Act convictions that he was charged. And that was kind of a big theme in terms of his argument today, and that the defense submitted 300 cases of Mann Act cases where it talked about pimps and minors being trafficked, immigrants being transported, homeless people being transported, all of that stuff. And so that was kind of the theme, at least from Jason Driscoll's point of view, and that the defense also saying that Miss Slavic, Christy Slavic, who is one of the federal prosecutors, blamed Mr. Combs for having a drug addiction for 25 years, something that they were also talking about, how he had been addicted to drugs going back at least to 2000. And so a lot of his conduct might be not necessarily excused because of his drug addiction, but they say that might be kind of the underlying reason. And then when you get to Nicole Westmoreland, she was talking about Sean Combs' inspiration and his commitment at MDC Brooklyn, where she was talking about all of his successful businesses. She was talking about how he started a record label from the ground up. She was talking about his clothing line. She was talking about his television company, that being Revolt, and that's where she started to really kind of get emotional, where she was saying that Sean Combs spent a majority of his adult life really trying to help the Black community, really trying to give back to the community, that he isn't this larger than life persona, he's just a man who makes mistakes. When it came to the other defense attorneys speaking, Brian Steele was just very urging of the judge to please consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma throughout his life. Brian Steele urged the judge to consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma in his life, and that there have been times in Sean Combs' life, especially when he had drugs in his system, that there were times where he had flatlined and that he was trying to be a better version of himself. And I feel like, Jesse, that was really the theme of all of what the defense was saying, that these 13 months were really reflective of Sean Combs. He wants to be a better person. He wants to leave the past in the past and be a better person for the future. And so even when it came to Xavier Donaldson, he was speaking about how Sean Combs should receive a just punishment. He brings up intent when he talks about Sean Combs' conviction of the Mann Act charges, and that Sean Combs isn't just a pimp, and that he was talking about his work at MDC Brooklyn, where Xavier Donaldson said, we've had assemblymen and politicians, billionaires in MDC, but nobody besides Sean Combs was there to actually help out the other detainees and the other inmates there. And then finally with Mark Agnifilo, his whole argument was that domestic violence comes with childhood trauma. So I feel like the defense was really kind of trying to pull at the heartstrings a little bit of the judge, and even possibly the public too, because this was their final say to all of the people, all of the media coverage that this case has brought attention to. And so I think at the end of the day, from the defense's perspective, they wanted everyone, including the judge, to just look at Sean Combs as a man who made terrible, terrible mistakes, and whether or not he's been punished enough for it, that was kind of what the judge had to consider today.
By the way, I think it was interesting that I think the prosecution said in response that only one of the 5 defense lawyers who spoke actually mentioned the victims. It was very much Sean Combs focused. Now, I say that because Sean Combs did something very interesting when he spoke. He mentioned the victims. We'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I wasn't in that courtroom, but I will tell you,
people outside were holding signs, some shouting for justice, others begging for mercy, but inside, all that mattered were the judge's words. And those words had just cemented Diddy's fall from grace in the most brutal way possible. As the guards approached to take him into custody, Diddy turned toward them with eyes full of disbelief. His voice cracked again, this time not with anger, but fear. Please, he said, barely audible, please, "You don't understand." But there was no sympathy left in that room. The world had changed around him, and no amount of pleading could reverse what had been done. His lawyers stood silently, their faces pale, their careers likely ending alongside his freedom. Reporters outside erupted as the news hit. The cameras, the live feeds, the tweets, all of it exploded in real time. Diddy sentenced. The headlines screamed, "Judge hands down shocking prison term." Social media went into overdrive. Fans cried, critics celebrated, old friends stayed silent. The empire he built was now a carcass.
I reading about this, I could feel the emotion that came out when Sean Combs' children provided statements. That felt like a turning point. The judge would later reference the children. Talk to us about who spoke, what they said, and what was it like in that courtroom?
Well, I think it's a moment that a lot of people were anxious to hear, not only from Sean Combs himself, but Sean Combs' children, who, I mean, we do have to admit, Jesse, they have been through a lot throughout the duration of Sean Combs' civil litigations, all the way going into his federal case, too. And so when the Combs children came up for the victim impact statements, they all came up together. They really were showing kind of a solidified, solid unit when they were up at that podium speaking in front of the judge. I will say the only exception of Sean Combs' 7 children was the fact that his 2-year-old daughter Love wasn't there inside the courtroom. So in terms of who was speaking, it was all of them, again, except baby Love. But Quincy spoke first. And so one thing people have to note about Quincy is that Sean Combs isn't his biological dad. Albie Shore actually is. And so, but what Quincy said when he first spoke to the judge, because he was the first one up, he is also the oldest child too, is that he is our father. In front of us, he's a changed man. Week after week, we see him evolve. Our father will never do anything to jeopardize his freedom ever again. Then Justin Combs spoke next. He's the second oldest son. Justin Combs said, "Please give our father a second chance. This has been the toughest time he's ever been through. This time saved my father's life. I talk to my father every day. He's changed for the better. I ask you to see my father the way I do." Christian Combs was next, and Christian Combs kind of also brought kind of the personality here a little bit too, Jesse, where he says, "I'm the one who people say I look the most like my pops. I studied my dad up and down. He's my superhero. He taught me to treat women with respect." So he said, "The past year, I had to travel across the country to see him for 2 hours. He's changed. I see in his eyes as his twin that he's changed. Please give my family grace and please give him mercy." But really, Jesse, where the heartstrings were with the girls, and that was Jesse Combs, Chance Combs, and Delilah Combs, who were speaking today. Jesse Combs, who spoke first as far as the daughters go, she broke down immediately when she got up to that podium and started speaking. She said, "We aren't here to excuse his mistakes. We need him in our life. I lost my mom," her mom being Kim Porter, "when I was very young. He promised to be there to keep us safe." Then Chance Combs, she had spoke, and she said that we're just his daughters, but we do need our father. When we talk, he speaks with a clear mind. He's more patient. He's thoughtful. He wants to be a better man, a better father. He's parented our 2-year-old sister from jail, and I saw glimpses of our father. Our sister deserves a father who's present to teach her how to ride a bike, to tuck her in at night before she goes to sleep, something that any kid would want." And then the final child who spoke on behalf of the family was Delilah Combs, and she said that we're scared of the thought of not having our mom and our dad in our life. She says that these are the years that we'll never get back. I know that much of the missing years hurt because we have lost our mom. We already lost so much. Please, Your Honor, give our family the chance to heal together. Not as a headline, but we're trying to do better. And so I think from just like a human perspective, it was very emotional. I mean, you couldn't help but feel for the children, especially his daughters, because some of his children have lost both parents. But, I was wondering, would their impact statement have any sway on the judge, who I believe that had already made up his mind going into sentencing? And so it was interesting just to hear just the emotional impact of what they've been through before Sean Combs was ultimately sentenced.
I think it did. I think it did have an impact on him. He mentioned something about the children.
Every brand, every business partner was instantly reevaluating their connection to him. Inside the courthouse, Diddy tried to collect himself, but it was useless. His voice cracked again as he whispered something to his lawyer, maybe about an appeal, maybe just disbelief. He sat back down, his body slumped, staring at nothing. You could see it in his eyes, the realization that this was real, that the life he once controlled with money and fame was gone. And then came the worst part, the handcuffs. The cold metallic sound echoed across the courtroom like a closing chapter. The guards clasped them around his wrists, and the man who once commanded millions with a single post or press appearance now stood powerless, his head lowered, his future sealed. The cameras caught it all, the moment the king of the music world became just another prisoner. Outside, the chaos was unreal. Protesters screamed, news anchors shouted over each other, fans sobbed, and critics smirked. Every network replayed the footage of his stunned reaction, the instant his face crumbled under the reality of what he had become.
Children later on. Again, we'll get to that. We're teasing it up because it was significant what the judge said. The judge would end up referencing not only Sean Combs, but the children and the victims too. We'll get to that. All of this was coupled by something I don't think I've seen in a sentencing. There was a video, an 11-minute video that was created by the defense that was played in court. What exactly was this video?
Well, this video, to me, Jesse, I kind of thought was a little bit of a love letter to Sean Combs, whether it was to the judge, whether it was to us in the public. I was kind of curious about where the direction was going because we did see the video prior to it being shown in court today. So I did get a glimpse of it where I saw bits and pieces of the many accomplishments Sean Combs had. And I think that's one thing that nobody can take away from him is that he did have incredible accomplishments, such as the record label, the fashion label, the fact that he was starting charter schools in the inner city, the fact that he was trying to raise money, the fact that he was getting more black and brown people in order to vote and do their civic duty, all of that sort. And so I think in terms of just what the video was to show that this is who Sean Combs is, but there were also glimpses of what he's like as a dad. And so there were moments where we saw him and his children together, and this was all of his children, going from his oldest child going to his youngest child, that being his daughter Love. And so we really got to see what it was like for him not to be this quote unquote larger than life person, but really to see what he is like as both him during his career and him as a father. And so it was a very humanizing video. It's about 11 minutes long. It was a very interesting glimpse into his life, kind of post all of the civil litigation, of the federal case, all of that sort. And so some of the even quotes from it was, let's go, and that means to be positive. And so I think that was kind of the theme of this, was just positivity and just how positive Sean Combs has been to certain people's lives during certain moments of his life.
We got to talk about the big moment. This was the moment we were all waiting for. Sean Combs made a statement. Now, he provided a letter to the court in anticipation of this. It seems like what he said maybe echoed a lot of what he wrote in the letter. He talked about his time in the MDC. He talked about he can't change the past, but he can change the future, that he could be a force for good. He mentioned the victims. He mentioned how sorry he was. This was an important moment, though, because this is the first real opportunity he had since all of this began to substantively address the allegations, to address the charges, to address Jane, to address Cassie. This was his opportunity. He stayed silent the entire trial, as he was supposed to. He didn't take the stand. Talk to us about what he said in court today, and we weren't there. What was his tone like? How were people reacting to this? Because that wasn't captured.
Yeah, so honestly, Jesse, even right from the beginning, it was kind of a dramatic moment in a sense, because right off the bat, when the judge said, Sean Combs, I'll give you a moment, take however much time you need. And so we're all waiting for him to say the first word. Would he sit down while he's giving his impact statement? Would he stand up? We didn't know what was happening because he really took like a good minute to, I think, kind of compose himself. And then he stood up, he took a deep breath into the mic, which we did hear, which was audible. And he said right off the bat, I want to thank you for giving me a chance to speak up for myself. It's the hardest thing for me to do was to not speak throughout all of this. He wasn't one to be giving out TV interviews or talking about this case or anything like that. From behind bars, even prior to his incarceration, he didn't do any of that. And so it was interesting to hear, what was he going to say? Was he going to say Cassie Ventura's name? Was he going to say Jane? We didn't know. And so when he said right off the bat, the hardest thing for me to do was not speak. I want to apologize again to Cassie Ventura for any pain that I caused emotionally or physically. I mean, we all kind of know where we were when that Intercontinental.
The man who once threw the biggest parties in Hollywood was now being escorted into a van, his wrists chained, his empire fading with every step. As the car drove him away, reports began to circulate. Sources close to him said he had been up all night before sentencing, barely eating, barely sleeping, obsessing over what might happen. He had told his inner circle that he believed his name, his legacy, his power would protect him. that even if the world turned on him, he'd find a way to survive it. But as the reality hit, that belief shattered. The system didn't care who he was. It didn't care about his fame or his money. All that mattered now were the facts, the testimonies, and the verdict that had just destroyed his future. Hours later, in the holding cell, witnesses described him sitting alone, his hands clasped together, whispering to himself. Some said he was praying, others said he was still in denial. Either way, he was broken. The arrogance that once defined him had been replaced by fear. His lawyers were already working on an appeal, but everyone knew the chances were slim. The sentence was harsh, almost symbolic, a statement to the world that even the most
or do anything to jeopardize his freedom. Now, Justin Combs spoke afterwards, Christian Combs spoke after that, but Jesse Combs is really where it started to kind of pick up in terms of the emotions again, where she immediately started crying. And I can only imagine how that feels to speak in front of not only the judge, but in front of your father, in front of a whole bunch of people in the media who want to hear what the kids have to say. Because even though we saw them inside the courtroom, Jesse, even though we've seen them in passing in the cafeteria and other things like that, this is the first time we're really kind of hearing them speak about how their lives have been impacted by Sean Combs's, the allegations that have been against him and the conduct, all of that stuff. But they said right up the front, they were like, we're not here to make excuses for him. We aren't here to excuse his mistakes. We need him in our lives. Jesse Combs talking about how she lost her mom, that her mom being Kim Porter when she was very young, and that Sean Combs promised to be there to keep them safe. Then Chance Combs spoke afterwards, and she said that we're just daughters who need our father. When we talk, he speaks with a clear mind now. He's more patient. He's thoughtful. He wants to be a better man. He wants to be a better father. He's parented our 2-year-old sister from jail, and I see glimpses of our father during that. She said our sister deserves, and that the sister being 2-year-old Love deserves a father who is present to teach her how to ride a bike, to tuck her in at night before she goes to bed, something that all kids want from their parents, right? Then Delilah Combs afterwards spoke after Chance. She said that we're scared of the thought of not having our mom and our dad in our life. And she says that these are the years that we'll never get back. She says, I know that missing years hurt because we lost our mom and they've already lost so much. So really that was kind of a time where we were really kind of seeing everyone get a little emotional in terms of people on the defendant's side. Sean Combs himself, I think it was a moment where we were kind of seeing him inside the courtroom at the defense table really kind of turn and look at his children. Kind of hard for him to keep a straight face with that. Like, he was so emotional, which I understand. He's a father, and he's a father to many children, and the kids have gone through a lot in their life. And so it was very emotional, Jesse. I can definitely say that. It was a lot of tears inside the gallery, especially on Sean Combs' side, but definitely from Sean Combs himself, too. He was very emotional while his kids were speaking.
There's a lot at stake today. It's not surprising you're seeing this. By the way, before I ask you something else, I just have to let you know the amount of love that you're getting online is quite palpable. Basti failed. Greetings, my queen. We love you in Germany. Christina Lester, super chat comment, who's been great today. Tell Elizabeth her skin is glowing as per usual. Nikki Hayes, how are you, Elizabeth? We heart and appreciate you. Anto Grego, beautiful Jesse and Queen Elizabeth. Love you guys. You make a great team. Maylin Bourbon, oh, how I missed the chat, the lunchtime show, and the Long Crime team and panel. Long Crime, thank you for all your hard work. So, and super chat question from Mike. What's the update? Well, I think Elizabeth just laid out the entire update. I will ask you this. There was a question from the lone medic. How long does Elizabeth think Diddy will be sentenced for? Wasn't there a comment today, Elizabeth, from the judge that he does not see any reason to deviate from the guidelines of what, 5 to 7 years?
Yes, and so there was a lot of math that I was honestly doing, Jesse, because when they're talking about the sentencing guidelines, they're always talking.
Powerful can fall. The industry's reaction was immediate and brutal. Collaborations were pulled, contracts terminated, old interviews resurfaced, painting him in a darker light. People who had once praised him now spoke out against him. It was like watching an empire crumble brick by brick. Everyone who had once smiled beside him on red carpets was suddenly silent or publicly distancing themselves. That's how the industry works. When the spotlight shifts, loyalty evaporates. And behind it all was Diddy, trapped in a small cell, stripped of the luxury, the power, the control. The man who once controlled entire rooms with his presence now had no say over when to eat, when to sleep, or when to speak. For someone who had lived his entire life commanding attention, That loss of control was its own kind of torture. His family, meanwhile, was reeling. His children, the ones who had once idolized their father's success, were left to face the media storm alone. They were hounded by cameras, reporters shouting questions about the verdict, about how it felt to see their father fall. Friends said the emotional toll on them was immense. Some defended him, insisting he wasn't the monster the media painted him as. Others quietly stepped away, trying to shield themselves from the chaos. Inside the industry, people whispered. They talked about how they'd seen it coming, how the signs had been there for years, the rumors, the arrogance, the unchecked power. Some said it was karma, others said it was politics. But everyone agreed on one thing: Diddy's story had become a modern tragedy. A man who had everything, who built an empire from nothing, undone by his own decisions and the darkness that had followed him for years. As the days passed, new details leaked about his behavior after the sentencing. Guards described him as quiet, almost hollow, staring at the walls for hours. Occasionally, he would ask about his appeal, his tone switching from calm to panicked in seconds. The man who once boasted that nothing could break him now looked completely broken. The charisma was gone, the confidence, the swagger, all of it replaced by the cold realization that his life would never be the same again. The public fascination with his downfall didn't fade. Every headline, every photo, every rumor fed into the story of a man who had fallen from unimaginable heights. He had been the embodiment of excess, of ambition, of success at any cost, and now, he was the warning, the example of what happens when the illusion of invincibility meets reality. No matter what appeals his lawyers file, no matter how his story twists from here, that moment, the moment the judge announced his sentence and he shattered in disbelief, will never fade. That was the real verdict. That was the day the legend died, and the man was finally forced to face the consequences of the world he created.